On this muggy day in Nardo, Italy, a challenger from rural Sweden is preparing to try to break the record of world's fastest production car. Set by the McLaren F1, this record has defied all takers for 7 years and stands at a blistering 240.3 miles per hour. A humid day and a tightly ovaled track seem to portend another failure.
Nardo is a circular track, so it kind of scrubs away a lot of speed. You're constantly on a turn.
But the Challenger is no ordinary car. This is the CCR from the innovative Koenigsegg Motor Company. It quickly accelerates past 100 miles per hour, and then 150. By the time the CCR is in 6th gear, it's well over 200 miles per hour, rapidly closing in on the old record. The man behind the new Challenger, Christian von Koenigsegg, had an infatuation with fast cars that began in his youth.
When I was 5 years old, I saw a Norwegian puppet movie about a bicycle repairman who built himself a race car, and I got really excited by it. So I said to myself, that's what I want to do. I want to build my own car.
That dream led Christian to start the Koenigsegg Automotive Company in 1995. Soon thereafter, he designed the CCR.
I basically started from a blank sheet of paper, and I had some ideas of what my car would be like. It was going to be a nimble, lightweight, high-performance sports car with a detachable hardtop that actually gave the convertible feeling when you take it off. CCR stands for Competition Coupe Radical. The Koenigsegg CCR is the lightest, most powerful, fastest supercar ever built. It's basically a race car for the road, but it has features that you expect from a road car, such as air conditioning, stereo, power windows, power steering, etc. It's got racing car performance, but it's still very streetable and drivable, and you can cruise around in it. Our production facility used to be a fighter jet squadron. Now we build the fastest car in the world in here.
Under that car's sleek hood is an engine that holds a world's record for sheer power.
This is the engine for the CCR. It's the most powerful production engine in the world with 806 horsepower. The CCR features a very lightweight V8 engine with a patented supercharging system. We base it off a production racing block. All the internals are our own engineering. We were looking at doing V12, but we quickly realized that our performance target of 800 horsepower could be obtained safely within a V8 structure.
One of the CCR's most striking features is its unique door mechanism.
We have a very wide car with very wide doors, so we realized that when we parked next to other cars, that was not very practical. And I had seen on an electrical car in Sweden a similar door system where you open first outwards and then upwards, which was quite intriguing. But it wasn't really practical to first move out and then up. So we came up with this system where we do it all in one motion, which, according to everyone we talked to, was impossible. It's probably the most difficult door system on any car in the history of cars. But it works very good, and it's very stable.
Another feature crucial to the car's success is much less obvious. There's precious little metal used in construction of the CCR. Instead, super high-tech carbon fiber makes up much of the car.
The carbon fiber technology was originally invented by NASA in the US for their space program. Basically, it's the strongest, lightest, commercially available material to produce products out of. And it's still very expensive, but if you want to go lightweight and strong, carbon fiber is the way to go.
In its original state, carbon fiber looks like the thin neoprene rubber used in wetsuits. The fiber is formed onto molds of the specific car part it's to become. Then, on those molds, the parts are placed into a kiln-like oven, whose temperature is constantly monitored.
This is the oven we use to cure our products in. We'll cure them for 120 degrees for 1 hour. Then it will be several more times stiffer than steel.
The now super-hardened fiber remains remarkably lightweight. The molded pieces are then fitted together by hand.
We use carbon fiber almost everywhere in the cars, so that means the chassis structure is actually carbon fiber. The engine structures, even valve covers, are carbon fiber. All the interior trim panels are very, very thin carbon fiber. Even the body panel system is carbon fiber. When you see them painted, they just look like steel or aluminum, but it's carbon fiber underneath.
Technology this sophisticated wasn't even imaginable when automobiles made their first appearance in 1886. Built by Carl Benz, the first production car had 3 wheels and 1 cylinder.
It'll do about 12 miles an hour, 13 miles an hour, but a horse would have to really be pushing it to go 14 miles in an hour, and so it was quite a bit. And he built 10 of them. I wasn't there, but I guarantee you 2 of those cars went off against each other in a race.
By the turn of the century, automobile speeds had increased enough to spawn the first sanctioned car races, including one in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, that carried historic implications.
The Ford against the Winton, and this is back in 1903, and there was a prize of $10,000. Now, Ford had gone bankrupt a couple of times, but he built this car for this race. The Winton had mechanical trouble on the 9th lap and did not finish, and here comes Ford, goes on by him and wins the race, and that was the start of the Ford Motor Company. $10,000 in 1903 was a lot of money, and he took that money and he started building his first Model Ts, and the rest is history.
Ford's Model T came off the production line with a top speed of 45 miles per hour, an increase of nearly 400% over Benz's first models just 20 years earlier. But Ford soon had serious competition in the speed department. Among the fastest production cars of the teens was the aptly named Raceabout, built by the Mercer Automobile Company in Hamilton, New Jersey.
There were 2-seater cars, what today would be considered a sports car, although you sat on the body, not in the body, and they were considered stylish, fast automobiles. We have a 1912 Mercer in our collection, and that car will do an honest 95 miles an hour. We're talking almost 100 years ago. That was supersonic for its age.
But it wouldn't be until the early 1930s that a production car would smash through 100 miles per hour. The Duesenberg.
Duesenberg was actually a race car builder, and he raced at Indianapolis. Duesenbergs, they would go in second gear, they would do 90 miles an hour. And top gear, they were good for maybe 105 miles an hour. Now, they only made a little over 500 Duesenbergs altogether between 1930 and 1936, but that was considered a very, very fast production car.
The decade before World War II saw technical advancements like the Buick Dynaflash V8 engine. These powerhouses helped keep the speed crown in the U.S. with cars like the Buick Century. But after the war, European automakers made a determined run at the title, starting with a small but powerful 2-seater from the UK that pushed the mark even higher.
They decided to designate the car the XK120 based on the fact that it would go 120 miles an hour. And Jaguar's done that through the years.
The XK120 and the ensuing E-Class of Jaguar Roadsters changed the world's perception of what a fast street car looked like. Soon, other European designers like Enzo Ferrari began production models based on racing success.
Ferrari's full emphasis for himself was racing, but to finance race cars, he built production automobiles. We're talking cars that you and I could get in, hit the key, start up, turn the radio on if we want to listen to some music.
By the late 1960s, other European builders upped the ante, attacking the 200-mile-an-hour barrier, like one Ferruccio Lamborghini.
Lamborghini was a farm implement manufacturer, and he was a very wealthy man. So he went back to his plant and he said, all right, we're going to build a sports car and we're going to go head-to-head with Ferrari. And he did the Countach. And the Countach was a absolute knock your socks off, you know, you just can't believe it, you know, take your breath away type of car. It was so revolutionary. And they claimed they were the first production car to go 200 miles an hour.
Soon other cars were challenging even higher speeds. As before, most had their origins on the track.
McLaren is a race car company. Bruce McLaren was a race car driver, an Australian. He came to Europe and was driving for other people and then decided to design and build his own cars. And they thought that it would be a great idea with all this technology they had, particularly from Formula One, to build a car for the street.
The McLaren F1 became one of the most celebrated production cars ever created. Featuring a unique driver center cockpit, it had a powerful BMW V12 engine that cranked out 627 horsepower. Introduced in 1991, the F1 went on to set the world production speed record, just over 240 miles per hour on March 31st, 1998, only 2 months before the final F1 rolled out of the factory. But on that muggy Italian day in February 2005, after 7 years, that mark was about to become history. The Koenigsegg CCR ran smooth and hot. It powered up to 240 and then smashed through with a sizzling, record-breaking 241 miles per hour, making it the new world's fastest production car. Of course, because the CCR is a production model, anyone can place an order. But you'd better start saving now.
The basic price in US dollars with the current exchange rate would be around 590,000 US dollars, so it's quite high.
But for that price, you get to drive a technological wonder. The world record-holding CCR, fondly referred to as the Ghost.
We have a special symbol for the CCR. It's a ghost. The Ghost version symbolizes the fastest possible Koenigsegg. We have a lot of mottos within Koenigsegg, and one that I like the most is, if you haven't seen the future, you haven't driven fast enough.
But perhaps you'll glimpse the future from a world's fastest machine that literally floats on air. The CCR's specially formulated Michelin tires are rated for speeds up to 250 miles per hour. The world's fastest will return on Modern Marvels. In Shanghai, China, it's opening day for a train line unlike any other on Earth. Almost silently, the streamlined coaches begin their journey. Soon they're traveling at a very untrain-like speed, a blistering 270 miles per hour.
We actually like to think of our train as an airplane without wheels. We're flying on the ground, so to speak.
A remarkable propulsion system has started a revolution in rail travel. Magnetic levitation, or simply maglev.
Magnets, when opposite poles are put together, will tend to propel themselves away from each other. Now, take that technology and apply it in a controlled manner to a rail vehicle, and there's incredible speeds that can be attained.
The Shanghai maglev system was developed by the Berlin-based company Transrapid. Here in rural Emsland, Germany, Transrapid's test facility features a 12-mile track that treats paying passengers with speeds nearing 275 miles per hour.
Maglev actually goes back a long ways. The first patents were produced in the mid-30s, but it took a long time before the rest of the technology actually caught up with it. Transrapid began the R&D on magnetic levitation in the late 60s. And during the 1970s, we went through a series of test vehicles to prove the concept, prove the technology.
The technology behind magnetic levitation is both remarkably high-tech and deceptively simple.
Maglev works by taking electromagnets and using them to lift a train up from underneath and guide it down a track. The train itself rides on an electromagnetic field. To support the train, we have what we call support magnets. We have an iron core, and then we have aluminum ribbon, ribbon-type coils wrapped around it. And then also integrated into that is what we call a linear generator, which is a special piece of equipment we use to transfer energy from the guideway up into the train as it's going along. Each of the magnets also has an epoxy case around it, which makes it impervious to the environment.
The support magnets are clustered together underneath the train cars.
This is a Trans-Rapid electromagnet for levitation. It has 12 coils. Each train section has about 16 levitation magnets that lift the vehicle up. A train with 3 sections has 560 of these coils.
There's about half that number that are guiding the train, and they're located on the right and left sides of the train, and they guide it as it moves down the track.
Thus, maglev trains have no use for rails or even wheels. There is also no true locomotive.
In contrast to traditional trains, our motor is in the guideway itself. The train levitates, but otherwise it's passive.
Inside the guideway is what is termed a long stator linear motor. Similar in principle to a conventional rotating electric motor, here the stator, or windings, have been laid flat along the underside of the guideway. Instead of a conventional motor's rotating electromagnetic wave, a traveling wave is sent down the length of the windings. This attracts the support magnets on the train and pulls it down the guideway.
It's like a surfer stands on his surfboard. If the wave goes faster, the surfer goes faster. If the wave slows down, the surfer slows down. We're doing the same thing with electronics.
Perhaps most remarkably, there is no onboard operator.
The Trans-Rapid is essentially the world's largest radio-controlled train. We have no driver. We have a control room, and so the whole system is run using very sophisticated computers.
We can see where the train is at all times and control its speed from right here in the control room. All function of the train can be monitored from right here.
The control room uses radio signals to constantly monitor and manage the progress of the train. The guideway itself is controlled in the very same fashion.
The motor in our train is actually in the guideway, and we power that motor from substations which are located along the route. And we feed that power out through cables up to the guideway, but we actually send it to the guideway at about half-mile increments. And we turn each half mile on as the train goes by. And so as the train is moving down the track, we're actually switching the guideway on and off as the train moves down.
But far from the test track in Germany, the Shanghai maglev turned heads, and not only for its record-breaking speed. Its massive construction was also remarkably rapid.
The Shanghai project was phenomenal. The total project took less than 3 years, from signing of contracts to the opening day, which is a record in itself.
Running 20 miles from the city's financial center to the airport, it has already proven the speed and reliability of maglev technology. The train runs on time and is rarely out of service.
After about 1.5 years of operation, the train is actually running better than we all thought. We're currently running at about a 99.6% uptime.
120 more miles of guideway is already being planned to the seaport city of Hangzhou. This addition alone is nearly 10 times longer than the very first railroad tracks laid in the United States nearly 2 centuries ago.
Rail travel really came into being in the mid-1820s. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad became the nation's first common carrier. Their first segment of track was about 13 miles.
Using primitive wood-burning engines, these early trains could attain speeds near 20 miles per hour. The American Civil War would provide the next great leap in train speed and technology.
Speeds were increasing. You saw trains moving up to 40 miles an hour, and the technology had moved to a boiler that now was oriented horizontally, allowing the greater speeds.
By the turn of the 20th century, steam engine technology had been supercharged. By burning a hotter fuel, coal, these engines could attain even greater velocities.
They're trying to draw as much power out of the steel wheel on the steel rail as they possibly can. And there's some marvelous technology that's being developed during this period.
One visual innovation of the first decades of the 20th century was the curb appeal of these newly streamlined engines.
The Pennsylvania Railroad GG1 electric locomotive was developed in the 1930s, very capable of speeds over 100 miles an hour. This train was a beautiful maroon streak traveling across the Jersey and Pennsylvania countryside.
The Second World War would mark the end of the railroad's golden age. For after the war, passenger traffic plummeted.
It was because automobiles and airlines offered freedom combined with speed. And in the 50s and 60s, you saw some interesting last gasps of railroads attempting to push technology for speed. One of those is the General Motors Aerotrain. Using diesel technology, General Motors developed a train that was capable of traveling 102 miles an hour. Unfortunately, there were some technological flaws with the train, and it didn't take off and garner the curb appeal that they wanted.
Beginning in the 1960s, some countries started to offer higher speeds by placing new drive systems on the standard rails.
And some prime examples of this are things like the Japanese bullet trains, an electric-powered train running steel wheel on steel rail, yet attaining speeds over 186 miles an hour.
Another design, the French TGV, or Train à Grande Vitesse, is a wholly integrated system with updated track and switching technology. It set the old rail speed record of 236 miles per hour, which stood until the Shanghai Maglev smashed it by over 30 miles an hour. And when will the United States get its chance to join the Maglev Club?
In the U.S., actually, we're pursuing 5 or more projects at the moment. The furthest advanced are in Pittsburgh and in Las Vegas. And the Las Vegas project eventually will go all the way to Los Angeles. But we're currently waiting for the Congress to pass the next all-encompassing infrastructure law. And we're hoping that construction money will be in that law for the first Maglev project in the United States.
While the speed record set in Shanghai may see challengers in the near future, another, far more dangerous world's fastest mark has stood firm for nearly 3 decades. The magnetic field generated by the Transrapid Maglev exerts effects on its passengers that are only 10% as powerful as those received from using a typical hairdryer. The world's fastest will return on Modern Marvels. This boat, the Spirit of Australia, is ready to tackle the world's water speed record. Quite simply, seeking that record is a most lethal pastime.
The world's water speed record is probably the most dangerous sport on Earth. Since World War II, it has an 85% death rate, so it's not something you take lightly.
Ken Warby holds the record as the world's fastest man on water, with a speed of nearly 318 miles per hour. Even more remarkable is that this still unmatched performance took place in 1978.
There's been nobody else in history that ever designed, built, driven, and paid for their own boat to break the world water speed record.
Ken Warby's lifelong obsession began at an impressionable age.
In the early teens, I saw a drawing of Donald Campbell's Bluebird and bought some balsa, bought a little JetX solid propellant rocket, and fired the boat a few times across the pond and went back and said to my mother, I said, Mum, one day I'm going to do this for real.
Soon he was building and racing his own boats.
Probably the most successful one was a little racing skiff called Monte Cristo. I actually took out 3 state records in Australia with it. I raced outboards, hydroplanes, twin cockpit runabouts, just anything that floated, and if I could put my backside in, I did.
But Warby's dream was to build a jet-powered boat. He followed that dream on a tight budget.
The Spirit of Australia was designed literally one Saturday night on the kitchen table. Sat down with a 20 by 30 sheet of paper, a pencil, a ruler, and drew what I figured would be the ideal hull to fit a jet engine on. This boat was literally built in the backyard, under a tree, no garage, no nothing. Literally built out of plywood and spruce frame and covered in fiberglass and little else, just a whole lot of work.
All Warby needed was an engine.
A friend of mine told me of some Westinghouse J34 engines. They'd just scrapped it, and there were very few people at the auction. Nobody wanted jet engines, and the sum total of the money I had in my pocket was $65. I put my hand up, bid $65, got the engine.
Finally, it was time for Ken to begin his assault on the world record.
Ken decided to do it incrementally. He went out and first wanted to see if he could go 200 miles an hour. And then he went out again and he went about 260. And he bumped it up in a number of runs. And that's the reason Ken's alive and none of the other guys are.
Despite the danger, October of 1978 found Ken and the Spirit of Australia ready to take the record at Flowering Dam near Sydney.
There always is through the day a wind pattern that goes right down the centre of that lake, because what we're looking for is a chop, about a 6-inch chop, and get on the top of it, and it creates little air pockets underneath the boat. You want to aerate under your boat and go quicker.
Going quick in motorized boats has fascinated racers for over 100 years.
Organized powerboat racing began in 1903 with a race called the Harmsworth Trophy Race. All of the contestants, the boat, the motor, everything had to represent a specific country.
The first Harmsworth Cup was won with a top speed of merely 21.4 miles per hour. Soon, some very notable individuals were building fast boats, like Alexander Graham Bell and his futuristic-looking hydrofoil.
Bell produced a hydrofoil that had airplane propellers on the back, and he went about 70 miles an hour in 1919. For a boat, that was incredible.
Bell was denied the official world water record because of the unorthodox nature of his craft. By 1931, racers were quickly closing in on the 100-mile-an-hour mark. Two teams battled for the record, one British, led by Henry Seagrave, and one American, led by Gar Wood.
Seagrave decided that he was going to get that record or die trying. So he took the Miss England 2 out, and he hit something in the water. The boat turned over, and he was killed.
Just weeks later, Gar Wood became the first man to break 100 miles per hour on water. Around this time, a new hull design revolutionized boat racing: the hydroplane.
A hydroplane is any boat that's designed to skim across the surface of the water rather than cut through the water.
Hydroplanes use floats, or sponsons, to lift them up on top of the water. Soon they began to dominate racing. By 1950, the water speed record had risen to 180 miles an hour, courtesy of an American hydroplane, the ironically named Slow Motion. That speed caught the latest English team's leader, the now legendary Donald Campbell, by surprise. Campbell knew the only way to go faster was with a new power source, a jet engine. So he had one of the world's first jet boats built to his specifications. He named it Bluebird K7.
It was a catamaran 3-point, so it had a center body and then 2 pontoons on each side. The boat was very, very fast.
In 1955, Campbell smashed the 200-mile-an-hour mark in the jet-powered Bluebird. Over the next decade, he bested his own mark 6 times, ending with a record of 276 miles an hour. In England, he was a national icon. But Campbell still wasn't satisfied.
He wanted to be the first man to go over 300 miles an hour. And by 1967, the Bluebird K7 was a pretty tired machine.
Nevertheless, Campbell left London for Lake Coniston in the north of England to break 300 miles per hour. His first early morning run was blazingly fast.
He had planned to stop, fill the boat with fuel, let the wake dissipate from his up-lake run, and then run back. And for reasons that no one quite understands, he didn't refuel, and he ran back down the lake with the boat much lighter than it normally is because it was low on fuel, and ran right over his own wake. The boat left the surface of the water, tumbled end for end, and crashed into the water in a horrific accident. He and his boat were on the bottom of Coniston for almost 35 years.
But this tragedy didn't diminish Donald Campbell's legacy, which reached around the world to inspire a young boy in Australia.
The record breakers, be it land or air or sea, whatever, they were the heroes of the day. And to me, Donald Campbell was a hero.
But now it was Ken's turn to bask in glory. His speed of 317.596 miles per hour set a new world water speed record. Today, he remains the only man ever to go 300 miles per hour on water. While few of us will ever get to risk our lives piloting a jet boat, we all can experience a pounding heart and dry throat as this next world's fastest machine flings us into the air at 128 miles per hour. At his record-breaking speed of 317.5 miles per hour, Ken Warby could traverse the length of Lake Superior in just over 1 hour. The world's fastest will return on Modern Marvels. Military-grade technology slams you with 5G force as you ascend skyward. Then weightlessness teases before you plummet straight back down to Earth. Meet the world's fastest thrill ride, the roller coaster called Kingda Ka at Six Flags Great Adventure in Jackson, New Jersey.
Nowhere else on this planet are you going to get a ride that launches you from 0 to 128 miles per hour in 3.5 seconds.
Kingda Ka's radical design was originally conceived in the digital realm.
Ride design is so advanced now that once we've determined the style of ride that we want and we determine the area where we want to put this ride, we can generate everything within the computer.
Building the huge ride proved as challenging as its design was daring.
Weather plays such an important role in doing construction, particularly in the winter. One that may have been somewhat unforeseen in building this ride is the wind. You have two 500-foot cranes that are putting this ride up. The wind at 500 feet is obviously much higher than the wind on the ground. So on days when it might not even seem that windy, you can't actually fly steel because the wind is too high and the cranes cannot operate.
One of Kingda Ka's most remarkable features is its breathtaking acceleration. The technology was borrowed from the launch deck of an aircraft carrier.
Well, here we are in the hydraulic building, the heart of Kingda Ka. This is where we drive the coaster at 128 miles per hour. The driving force behind Kingda Ka is hydraulic fluid. The launching system is done with 8 500 horsepower motors that charge giant accumulators with hydraulic fluid. This fluid is pressurized much the same way that you might blow up a balloon. When the launch occurs, it's the same as letting that balloon go. That energy is released.
That immense energy powers hydraulic motors that spin a huge winch, around which a cable runs. Attached to the end of the cable is a catch car that actually hurls the ride down the track. Once the catch car gets up to speed, it releases and the ride continues on its own.
It takes just 10 seconds from the time the train is launched to when you are 456 feet on top of that tower.
Hurtling straight down the huge tower, the ride again rockets to over 100 miles per hour. Riders actually experience another period of weightlessness as it crests another hill. Then it's time to bring this blazing meteor to a stop. For that, Kingda Ka employs a unique braking system.
The braking system on Kingda Ka is done mainly with eddy current brakes. And zero contact. So there is no friction that occurs between the brake fin and the brake itself. It's all done through magnetic fields. So you hit the brakes and you're still probably screaming, catching your breath, and the train kind of coasts back into the station.
Roller coasters have always tested our nerves and our stomachs. But Kingda Ka's ancestors can barely be called thrill rides anymore.
The first roller coaster in the United States was built in Coney Island, New York in 1884. It ran approximately 8 miles per hour. The passengers would have to disembark the train, push it up to another deck so that it could make the return trip back.
Changes came fast after the success of that first thriller.
They decided that it was impractical for passengers to push the train, so they found a simple cable lift system that developed into the chain lift systems that we're familiar with today.
By the Roaring 20s, roller coasters could be found in almost every state in the Union. Some of the most famous coasters ever ridden came from this era, including the Cyclone at Coney Island.
The Coney Island Cyclone is the most famous amusement ride in history. It still delivers a punch just as severe as any modern roller coaster.
The giants of this era were still made of latticed wood, just like their earliest predecessors. But that too would eventually change.
It wasn't until theme parks came along in the late 50s they decided, okay, let's try steel as a material.
The first all-steel coaster took shape at the first modern-day American theme park.
The first metal roller coaster, as we know them, that actually worked and actually still runs is the Matterhorn at Disneyland.
Suddenly, by using steel, there were all kinds of new possibilities.
They realized we can go upside down with this. We can get faster, we can get bigger, and that's exactly what they did.
Since then, there have been no holds barred in the design and velocity of new so-called super coasters, which have carried riders to new, unprecedented thrills. But they all pale next to the new speed champ, the 128-mile-an-hour beast they call Kingda Ka.
I love this ride. Sometimes at work, I just take a little break, go out, jump on the ride, and back to work.
It really is a religious experience.
But if Kingda Ka still isn't quick enough for your taste, there's a record holder much, much faster still. Prepare yourself for the fastest ride on Earth. The typical thrust needed for a successful launch of Kingda Ka is nearly 21,000 horsepower. The world's fastest will return on Modern Marvels. Don't blink, or you might miss the fastest machine on Earth.
3, 2, 1, 0, fire.
We currently hold the world land speed record of 6,453 miles an hour. That is approximately Mach 8.6, or over 8.5 times the speed of sound.
That run was the fastest of nearly 11,000 tests that have been performed here on the Holloman High-Speed Test Track in New Mexico. All of those scientific tests could only happen in flight, high above the Earth, or in the more controlled simulated environment offered on the track. Those tests are on sleds, powered by a combination of rocket engines. Since each of those tests has its own unique requirements, every sled has to be custom-made.
We have engineers and fabricators here on site so that we can design and build our sleds right here at Holloman.
The sleds all run on unique skid-like devices called slippers.
We don't use wheels on our rail. We actually use a slipper which wraps around the rail. If you had a wheeled vehicle, there'd be nothing to keep it from lifting off and flying into the air. They're going at speeds that are 5, 6, 7, 8 times the speed of sound. You have to hold them onto the track.
The sled that captured the land speed record was the product of more than 50 years of high-speed research. One of the track's first applications was testing missile launches.
The test track here at Holloman actually had its first launch in 1950. The original track was only 3,500 feet long, And then in 1954, it was extended to support the testing of Dr. Stapp.
Colonel John Stapp came to Holloman to determine the limits of human endurance to G-forces and became the fastest man on Earth in 1954.
He was actually decelerated at minus 40 Gs, and he proved that if the human body properly restrained with seat belts could actually survive a very punishing deceleration.
That deceleration caused numerous stress-related injuries, including temporary blindness. This was one reason the Air Force halted human testing at the end of 1954. But in the ensuing decades, a huge range of new protocols would be tested here.
In the 1950s, we either were using launch assist to launch missiles off the track, or we were testing ejection seats for different aircraft. In the 60s, we started a lot of testing for ballistic missile guidance systems. In the 80s, we started doing quite a bit of work for the Missile Defense Agency to test different warheads. And then in the 90s, we started testing bunker buster type munitions, weapons that are supposed to penetrate into deep concrete bunkers and destroy high-value targets like deep command and control bunkers.
As the types of projects changed through the years, the track itself evolved to keep pace. Today, there are actually two tracks. One wide gauge and one narrow gauge. The original wide gauge track is used in slower tests, like those for aircraft ejection seats.
The narrow gauge sled is used for hypersonic testing. The narrow gauge sled provides less air drag, and it's easier to accelerate a payload to higher velocity.
Both sets of tracks share an alignment standard that has no equal in the world.
It's aligned to about 25 thousandths of an inch along its entire length. We have a full-time rail survey crew that maintains tight tolerances.
Which is essential for keeping sleds traveling at Mach 8 under control. But no living creature could survive a ride on this modern-day speed demon.
We may pull up to 150 times the force of gravity. So if you weighed 200 pounds, it'd be like 30,000 pounds of force on your body, and no one would survive that.
Such high speeds also generate huge amounts of friction. Scientists at the track have developed a unique method for combating friction's #1 byproduct: heat.
We actually take a piece of plastic, thousands of feet long, and then we inflate it full of helium. That helium reduces both the drag and any of the heating effects you get from going through the air very fast.
This saves the sled from potentially burning up in ultra-high-speed runs, like the land speed record attempt. That run was the culmination of a 4.5-year project.
We began to try to set a new world record to support the Missile Defense Agency, because their impacts were going to go from about a Mach 6 impact up to about a Mach 9 impact. The world record sled was actually 4 stages. The first stage was 5 rocket motors. They produced about 200,000 pounds of thrust. Then our second stage took over. 6 more motors, about 250,000 pounds of thrust.
The last 2 stages, using powerful new Super Roadrunner engines, each putting out 228,000 pounds of thrust, really got the sled moving.
At that point in time, the sled's accelerating about 150 times the force of gravity, and we reach our peak velocity of 6,453 miles an hour.
Which only confirmed what they've been saying at Holloman for a long time.
The Holloman High-Speed Test Track is the fastest ride on Earth.